Today's talk will be Flannery O'Connor in the Archives. Dr. Farrell O'Gorman is a professor of English at Belmont Abbey College. His publications include Catholicism and American Borders in the Gothic Literary Imagination. That's out from University of Notre Dame Press. His second book is Peculiar Crossroads, Flannery O'Connor, Walker Percy, and Catholic Vision in Post-War Southern Fiction from LSU Press. He has been a scholar in residence at Georgia College as well as a participant in the 2023 NEH Summer Institute we hosted entitled Reconsidering Flannery O'Connor. He also serves as a trustee at the Mary Flannery O'Connor Charitable Trust. And so I give you Farrell Gorman. He's going to talk for about 45 minutes, and then we'll have some time for Q&A.
Thank you, Katie. Thanks to both you and Charlotte for organizing this event. Glad to see so many people here. So as Katie just mentioned, I am co-trustee of the Mary Flannery O'Connor Charitable Trust. And what I'm going to share with you tonight has its origin in my being a co-trustee and becoming aware when I became co-trustee in summer of 2023, not only of the paintings, people have been aware of the paintings for a long time, but actually seeing the paintings and having access to the paintings, which have now been given to Georgia College, Flannery O'Connor's paintings, and were so well publicized last year. I became aware of that, but not only of that, of a lot of other material that has been gifted to Georgia College. And so I'm here to describe that to you tonight, because with the paintings in a storage unit on the road between Georgia College and Andalusia was a trove of material, approximately 135 boxes, 100 plus bankers boxes, if you're interested in the size of things, some smaller boxes. Here's one thing that's a bit complicated about this material. Technically, the material, some of it belonged to the estate of Regina Klein O'Connor. Some of it, because the materials that are actually made by or directly related to Flannery O'Connor belong to the charitable trust, if we were to be concerned about legal questions and so on and so forth. So as co-trustee of the O'Connor Charitable Trust and as a scholar in residence at Georgia College in fall of 2024, I sorted through these boxes with the goal of ascertaining what was there. And let me go ahead and I want to make really clear, I am not a professional archivist. I have no pretensions of being a professional archivist. And when I first became aware of this material, I was working pretty closely with Matt Davis, a former director of historic museums at Georgia College. Matt saw this material with me, but we were mainly looking at the paintings. But he was aware of all this material. We moved this material to the Andalusia Interpretive Center. And Matt, who knows a lot more about archiving than I do, said very clearly it would take a professional archivist 6 months of full-time work to fully catalog this material. I am not a professional archivist. I spent about 6 weeks of 3/4 time work, I suppose, in the interpretive center with the boxes, trying to sort through them. And as I did so, my goal was to primarily define material that clearly belonged to Flannery or that was created by Flannery. That was the material that I was looking for. But the majority of this material belonged to Regina O'Connor. So I'm going to give you some categories. We're going to say more about this in a second, but I want to make clear from the beginning that this gift, which has been given to Georgia College, comes both from the Mary Flannery O'Connor Charitable Trust and from Bob Mann, who's part of the extended family and became the executor of Regina's estate upon Louise Florencourt's death. So this is a joint gift from Bob Mann and the Mary Flannery O'Connor Charitable Trust. We could have tried to sort of legally sort out what belonged to Regina, what belonged to Flannery, but neither of us wanted to do it. And so we made the decision to jointly gift this, which I think was, of course, the right thing to do. So these 135 or 130 or so boxes, if I were to try and categorize what's in these boxes, well, there are extensive personal and financial records of Regina O'Connor, many of which are tied to the management of Andalusia Farm, right? I would say that the majority of the material falls into that category, right? The majority of the material in these boxes where you have lots of things jumbled together. And I did not entirely unjumble them. That was not my goal. My goal in digging through them again was to find things clearly directly related to Flannery O'Connor, pull them out, put them at the top of the box, usually in a purple folder. And although in some cases there are a lot of books, as we'll see, right? They stay where they are. But most of what's in here are extensive personal and financial records of Regina. But there's also correspondence sent to Regina regarding Flannery O'Connor, some of which is very interesting. I'll say more about that. There are some books and documents of the extended Klein family going back to the mid-19th century. There are correspondence and documents created by or belonging to Edward O'Connor, Flannery's father, which are really interesting. There are family photos and negatives, some from years in Savannah. There are books, journals, and magazines belonging to Flannery O'Connor. There are also other books that may belong to family members. It's debatable who they belong to. There's some that clearly belong to extended family. There are a small number of items created by Flannery O'Connor. So those are the broad categories of items that are in this gift. And I meant to say back on the last slide, we're coming to the end of the centennial year. So in March, we'll be moving into a new year, and maybe the beginning of Flannery O'Connor's second 100 years. I think there's a lot in this gift that can help to launch that period. Okay, so I'm going to talk about the books more than anything else. I'm going to talk about other things in the gift, but I'm going to start by talking about the books. And of course, many of us know Arthur Kinney's catalog of the books that were given to Georgia College. Overwhelmingly, I think around 1974 is when those books were given that are in special collections now. Kinney's book is published in 1985, where he catalogs all of the books. So if you go back and you look at Kinney's books, I wanted to do that as a way of thinking about how I was going to organize or present the books that I found. And I've not done exactly what he did. He actually worked with the Dewey Decimal System, which had been used to organize the book at the time. But yeah, if you look at his book, it's really clear. Literature and fiction are two different things. So literary criticism, poetry is literature, fiction is something else. But if you add those two categories together, you've got about 300 books. You've got about 200 books in the category of religion. You can take a look at Kinney and see all this for yourself. But there were 617 books in special collections as it was established back in the 70s and 80s. But Kinney, if you look at his introduction, notes that he's heard from Sally Fitzgerald that some other books are privately held at Andalusia, right? There are books that have not been given to the college for whatever reason. Kinney notes that in his introduction. So what's in the new gift? 326 plus books. Now, all of my numbers are a little bit fuzzy. It's debatable. Like there are some books that don't have Flannery's name in them, but you have to assume she's the only person in the family who would be reading these books. There are some books that have another family member's name in them, but O'Connor might have read them. Her handwriting's in them, right? It's going to take a long time to really sort all this out and make it crystal clear. I don't claim to have it crystal clear yet. I'll also say that the 326 it's a little bit misleading because about 100 of the books belong to one series that I'll say more about in a bit. But just in terms of numbers, about 326 books. And in looking at the books, there are various ways they can and should be organized. I was saying before the call to some of you, I have so much respect for archivists and librarians now that I, as an amateur, have just looked at all this material and thought about how to organize it and present it tonight. For the moment, what I've done is, and I did create a written catalog, a pretty extensive written catalog. I've got a couple of different forms of it. I'm not sharing all of that with you tonight, but I'm trying to summarize some things. Um, I decided to, it makes sense to me to kind of think of the books in terms of time periods. So books that books that O'Connor owned from childhood through 1940, right? So there are 27 literary works of one kind or another, 27 in a series of small books. I'll show you a sample in a bit, called the Little Blue Book series. There are 12 books. The Book of Knowledge, the Children's Encyclopedia, which has, she talks in Habit of Being about, I think, learning about the Greek myths from this children's encyclopedia. So that's most of those. Whoops, sorry. That's most of those books. From high school and college, 1940 to 1945, there are about 61 books. So textbooks, anthologies, a Georgia State College for Women bulletin and directory, about 32 literary books, including the works of Edgar Allan Poe, 7 volumes of the world's 50 best short novels. There are fairly substantial annotations in some of these books, I would say. You know, in the childhood books, there is definitely scribble and some actual annotation, but maybe the most heavily annotated of these books would be the high school and college books. There are just a couple of books that, at least on this slide, I've dated specifically to the Iowa period. Um, but that's really a little bit porous because I didn't include Virginia Woolf's To the Lighthouse, which some of you have heard, right, is one of the books that I found here. I think that she was reading and annotating that while she was at Iowa, but I've included Woolf in the um, this adult, this more after 1948 category. Okay, so there is one 97 set Encyclopedia of Catholicism, which I actually, as far as I can tell, O'Connor might have only read 3 of these books. It's kind of curious. She reviewed the lead book in The Presence of Grace, right? And she didn't seem to think much of that lead book. So I'm not sure how much she actually read the Encyclopedia of Catholicism books. Um, but you've got a lot of substantial um, authors, obviously, in that list that I've got at the bottom of the page. All right, so that said, we're now going to move on to some images. Some of my photos are better than others. Um, what I've just given you here is just a little overview of a directory from Georgia College. The Snow Goose is I believe, a novel from about 1942 that belonged to O'Connor. Here's an anthology of American poetry and prose. Here's an Aids to the Study of Literature with her name, which you can't quite make out up here in the corner. This is a pamphlet that she used at Iowa. Okay. Here's a textbook from 1944, right? So I'm assuming she's using this at Georgia College, Chief Modern Poets of England and America. And we're just gonna, I'm gonna go through some images fairly quickly. I'm just trying to share some data with you, but also to give you a sense of what it's like to just, look through all this material for the first time. And I'll say that in the anthologies, I'm going to give you one example of something that I think she probably, wrote as she was listening to her professor. That's on this page. This is a poem by Thomas Hardy, right? The British poet Thomas Hardy, called The Oxen, it's a Christmas Eve scene. And you could see the annotation in the margin. Like Houseman, would like to recapture the faith of his childhood, right? So that's the annotation in the margin of that Hardy poem. After then, we've got a prayer. We've got a poem by William Butler Yeats, "A Prayer for My Daughter," in this same anthology of British and Irish poets. "A Prayer for My Daughter," and so if you've read this poem, you know that Yeats is sort of envisioning his daughter as becoming not a Southern belle, but an Irish belle. And he hopes that she will be learned in courtesy. She'll be very polite. So if we look at the next page, here's Yeats hoping that his daughter may be courteous, And never begin but in merriment a chase, nor but in merriment a quarrel. May she live like some green laurel rooted in one dear perpetual place. Poor girl, O'Connor writes in the margin. This one, you might have to move your images around. But yeah, this is, I think, from a politics course, probably at Georgia College, government and politics in the United States. But do we see the annotation down at the bottom right corner? I know a lady with a pig named Frank Sinatra, right? So hearing O'Connor's voice here. Here's what I think is, a textbook at Georgia College, and it would be fairly easy to determine, right, to match this with a course I think that O'Connor took. This is more of an intellectual history sort of course, where she's actually making some more serious notes about the age of reason. Um, I'm going to jump from that to we are kind of jumping around in time period with the books. I'm jumping from that to Madame Bovary, right? So now we are in the group of books that she owned after 1948, I think. And this is Flaubert's Madame Bovary. And if you look at the little annotation over at the right here, this is um, a sentence that she quotes in Mystery and Manners. I think in The Nature of Aim and Fiction, I believe she quotes this specific sentence from Madame Bovary. So here we've got her original annotation. And what I love is that this was bookmarked with the receipt on the left, which came from, a feed store, presumably in Milledgeville. And if you read Madame Bovary and you know how much Madame Bovary hates being in a small town, a rural setting, I think the irony is great there. Um, Okay, here's to the Lighthouse, right? Her copy of To the Lighthouse by Virginia Woolf. You can see her name up there in the corner. Um, we're just a few pages in, and um, Mr. Ramsay is telling his young son James. I'm about to turn this sideways for you, so you'll see the text over on the left. He's he's telling his young son James that they're probably not going to be able to go to the lighthouse because the weather's bad. James is angry and wants to strike his father. That's what's happening on this page. So O'Connor is writing a note, gets dramatic effect by contrast of what is said to what is thought, right? So I think she's reading this for the technique, right? Maybe she's studying at the Iowa Writers Workshop. And there are, I think, 30 annotations probably into the lighthouse. Here's another one, and this is faded pencil in the original. To the lighthouse is divided into three sections, and the first section is called the window. And so here's her note: the window, purpose to give you the characters, to illuminate them, self-characterized and characterized by other characters, but seldom, if ever, by the author. Structure, very simple. Texture of writing makes it seem complex, right? So again, commenting on style, technique, not so much on the content there. But there are other places in To the Lighthouse where she does comment on content, really. So up here in the left, the one complete person in the book, Mrs. Ramsay, right, who's the central um, character in To the Lighthouse. There are more notes about Mrs. Ramsay's dead at the end of the novel, but she's being remembered by Lily, right? So there's some pretty substantial notes there. I'll skip over that one for now. Okay, looking at her childhood books for a bit. This is just for fun, but there's this whole series of little blue books, which are on various subjects, and they're each about the size of a postcard. Here is her copy of a book of humorous limericks, and it's got a few that are annotated. And I think it's worth looking at a couple of limericks that Flannery apparently liked. Well, well, there was an old monk of Siberia whose existence grew drearier and drearier. He burst from his cell with a hell of a yell and eloped with the Mother Superior. Lord, she is thine. There once was a lady from Guam who said, now the ocean's so calm, I will swim for a lark. She encountered a shark. Let us now sing the 90th Psalm. The Court of St. James. I sat next the Duchess at tea. It was just as I feared it would be. Her rumblings abdominal were simply phenomenal, and everyone thought it was me. From the capitalist press, yelled a communist, down with the Pope and all the crowned heads of Europe. Equal rights is our creed. What more do we need? Then somebody shouted out, soap. So who knows how old O'Connor was when she read these, but these are presumably her annotations. Her name is on this particular little blue book. Here's another book that I assume she got as a child. The Ideal Catholic Literary Readers by a Sister of St. Joseph. Don't fiddle with, O'Connor says. So we know that O'Connor was interested in Catholic readers and wanted ideal Catholic literary readers and talked about that some of her later essays, but she didn't think that this book was particularly valuable in outlining what an ideal Catholic literary reader was, to be sure. Here is another sample book, right? Here is a novel, I think published in 1935, but it's a Christmas gift to Mary Flannery from Regina and Ed, 1938. Here are some devotional books, and I think two of these have her name in them, but two of them don't. They could belong to other family members, presumably, but these are just some sample books. I'll skip over this for a second. Try and get caught up on time here. This is interesting. This is one of my only photos of just a complete box. And this is much more organized than most of these boxes. Again, most of the boxes currently are just a jumble, and it can contain Regina's financial records and some stuff that belongs to Flannery. It's all just kind of mixed in there together. This is an exceptionally organized one that is all books. And you can see this is a 10-volume set of the works of Edgar Allan Poe that belong to O'Connor, and they're works by Poe in, I think, almost every different period of her life. There's this Price O. Henry stories that contains one of her stories. And there's this book, A Christmas Story by Catherine Ann Porter. And if you open A Christmas Story by Catherine Ann Porter, you can see it was actually sent by Porter to Regina in 1967. To Regina O'Connor. Remembering faith with affliction, courage by nature, with love to the one who loved her best. Right? So it's in memory of Flannery from Porter. The novel Barren Ground by Ellen Glasgow is in this collection, and it contains some significant annotation. And since Barren Ground is set on a Virginia farm about a woman who inherits and is trying to run a farm in Virginia, I think that looking at these annotations is going to be very useful to anyone who wants to put Glasgow side by side with O'Connor. So those are my photos of the books. There are a lot of journals and magazines in this collection that must have belonged to O'Connor. Nobody else in that house would be receiving these journals, and there are some that belong to Regina. I'll mention those, but anyhow, Kenny actually lists journals and magazines in his book. They're there in special collections at Georgia College, but Kenny at least only lists about 94 individual issues. I think there are over 200 individual issues in this new gift. I wasn't counting them all that rigorously, but to give you a kind of overview, I did count sometimes if there was really, a box that just said Georgia Review. I made a note. There are about 30 books in there, or Kenyon Review, Sewanee Review. Some of these boxes, you've got the different issues mixed together. But yeah, if we're interested in O'Connor and the academic and literary journals that she's reading in the 40s in some cases, in the 50s, in the 60s, there are all of these titles. So some are literary, some are more broadly academic. Some have a religious focus. You can see that sort of the middle two groups there, I believe, belong to the Jesuit Father McCown, who then sent them to Flannery. How many of them did she actually read after he sent them to her? I don't know, but there they were. So, just a few photos of some of the journals. Yeah. And then there's this. I mean, there are odds and ends in the collection that don't fit, really neatly into my category. So this is a sort of academic article. So that's why I put it in here. Um, what is this? It's from a kind of medical bulletin in 1959, but it's about functional hyperinsulinism as a cause of neuropsychiatric illness. This is obviously not my area of expertise, but lupus, from the little bit I know, could cause functional hyperinsulinism. Um, was this something that somebody sent to Regina? I don't know. I don't know what this is, but it's an example of something, an interesting sort of odd and in that's in there. If we want to think about magazines as opposed to more formal journals, here is a list of some of the titles, right, that appear in here. And so some of these do have labels where they're addressed to Flannery. Some have labels where they're addressed to Regina. Some have neither. Some, like I think even some of the National Geographics actually have Flannery's name written in them. But here's an overview of some of the magazines that are in the collection. So again, if we want to sort of place her in her moment, in her contemporary intellectual, social, cultural milieu, I think these are all really valuable materials. And here just obviously we've got some more journals here on the left, but Mademoiselle, Mrs. Edward F. O'Connor, right? So it's Regina's there. Some copies of the other magazines. And of course, Flannery herself is featured in some of these. Harper's Bazaar, right? The Young American Writers. I think this one of these Good Country People is in, right? Um, okay. Okay. So far we've been talking about the books. We've been talking about journals and magazines. Um, Correspondence to Flannery O'Connor. There is not much, but there are a few items that cast light on significant friendships and on O'Connor's influence during her lifetime. There is one letter from Betty Hester that was sent on 28 or 26 July 1964, right? So this was sent just before Flannery passed away and was never received. Here is a letter from the Archbishop of Atlanta, and this is not long, this 1962, after he was installed as the Archbishop of Atlanta, and he sends Flannery a copy of his installation homily or sermon with a personal note in appreciation for the work that she does as an artist. So that's Archbishop Paul Hallinan. And so it's interesting that the new Archbishop of Atlanta is so aware of this fiction writer and wants to reach out to her. I don't think this is something we would see as often today. But yeah, it's still in the category of correspondence to Flannery. There's a box that just contains items that were sent to Flannery by Dean Hood, who's a woman from Florida who also had lupus, who O'Connor writes about, I think, more in the early 60s. There are some prank gifts. You can see these here, a worm that you put in the water and it starts to wiggle. Tooth Black, right? These are from Dean Hood. And Dean Hood seems to be a kind of amateur geologist. So she sent these different rock samples with all these notes on them. You can see them paper clip down at the bottom. This is her onyx gift. Field polish is spit, apparently. You can see how she and O'Connor would enjoy one another's company, I think. Okay. Flannery related items owned by Regina O'Connor is my next broad category here. There are dozens and dozens of condolence letters that are sent in the weeks and months immediately following Flannery's death from friends and prominent authors. There are Christmas cards sent to both. There's some post 1964 correspondence by Regina, regarding Flannery. Whoops. Yeah, so here's just a sample. These are letters that were sent in late August or September of 1964 from Robert Lowell, from Janet McCain, from the Rose Hawthorne home in Hawthorne, New York, the Dominican sisters that also had the home in Atlanta, from Robert Fitzgerald, from Cecil Dawkins up at the top, from Louise Abbott, from Ashley Brown, from Walker Percy, right? These are letters that were sent to Regina after O'Connor's death. And this is just a sample. There are dozens and dozens. Um, Here's a Christmas card from Walker Percy that was sent before O'Connor's death. And Percy's handwriting, I've read in other it's very hard to read, but here's what I think he's saying. So this is actually to Flannery. Um, all sorts of people come by here, that is in Louisiana, claiming to have come from the O'Connors. Jesuits, Trappists, and beats, I think he's saying, like beat poets. Um, they like you all right, but talk at length about your mother, right? So people come to see the Percys and talk about the O'Connor family, but mainly about Flannery's mother is what he's saying. And the last sentence is, glad to see you're a good liberal Catholic via Commonweal magazine. And so, yeah, what exactly does that mean? How many layers of irony are there? What in Commonweal are they referring to? Good question. Um, okay. Here's a letter from Mariette Lee sent to O'Connor, August 6, 1964. Dearest Mrs. O'Connor, I did not know it would be so soon, right? I did not know it would be so soon. I've not reproduced the whole letter here. I think this one is maybe 2 pages in full, but this letter is there from Regina, or from Mariette to Regina. Um, Here is Flannery O'Connor's baby book, kept by Regina. And I have to tell you, it's mostly empty. She actually didn't fill in most of it, but it is nice to see the christening page and to know that there was a baby, right? That there was a baby book. So this has to do with her being christened on Easter Sunday, April 12th, 1925. Here are some more baby announcements kind of things. Okay. There's some correspondence from Regina about 19, I think this is 65 or 66. The postmark's kind of fade. No, it's 65. She wrote it there. This is a professor at Mississippi College whose last name is Dollarhide, I think, but he's written a review of, I think, Everything That Rises Must Converge. And Regina writes him back. I know this is hard to read, but next page. Yeah, this is what Regina writes. So she kept a copy of this in a notebook, but she says, I'm sorry too that you never met Flannery. Um, for sure you would have found her a very charming and gentle person, maybe quite different from the kind of person who could write such powerful stories. Right. Thank you again for your kindness. Sincerely, RCOC. So she's writing to Dollarhide. This is just kind of funny. This doesn't have anything to do with O'Connor, but this is a framed certificate certifying that the Piedmont, Georgia Man of the Year in Soil and Water Conservation in 1971 was Mrs. Edward F. O'Connor. Okay. Okay, items owned or created by Flannery O'Connor. And of course, we would love for there to be even more of these. But what do we have? We do have one unsent letter to Ward Durrance, who she called Cudden Ward Durrance in July 1964. I'll show you that in a second. We have a few single page manuscripts or scraps, and I'll show you some samples of those. We have some artifacts. And we have some documents of newspaper clippings, et cetera, that are relevant to her work. Here is the letter to Ward Durrance, which she wrote on 20 July 1964 and never sent, with some photos. Dear Cudden Ward, I'm still in bed, but I managed to crawl out of it an hour or two a day and set myself upright at the typewriter. This enclosed story is the result so far. Tell me what you think. I have a blood count of 7 or something. etc. And this, I think this letter is about a page long. I've just included part of it here. Here's a poem, which I haven't seen before. Has anybody seen this before? Don't worry. After deep consideration, with my mind both free and loose, I have come to the conclusion that there's nothing like a goose. And so to all the world in general, I allot this good advice. It's all right to have a goose's brains if you can be just half as nice. M.F. O'Connor. When did she write this? I don't know. But this is in one of the boxes. Look at this. This is just a scrap of paper. Raber's thought has ceased to be dialogue. No voice answers him. No voice questions. So here's a scrap with a statement about the violent bear it away. And there are a few other scraps, but again, nothing more than a page. These are a couple of samples. As far as newspaper clippings and documents that are important to O'Connor, I mean, I think it's an open question as to whether this actually belonged to Flannery or to Regina, but this was in one of the boxes and laid out very carefully. It had been taken out of the paper, out of a newspaper. I can't identify what newspaper it came from and preserved, but this is a statement by the Catholic bishops of the United States in 1958 about racial discrimination, right? Speaking against racial discrimination. So Regina, Flannery, somebody in the house paid attention to this and kept it. Whoops. Yeah. There was one like bag that contained these news clippings. Just, survey these for a second. You have to assume these are just stories or ads, notices that O'Connor found interesting and hung on to, and we can imagine these sorts of characters finding their way, of course, into her stories. The one little note at the bottom of the world's youngest evangelist here, it says 6 years old. 6 years old. That's the world's youngest evangelist there. Sister Ramona, the faith healer, I thought I'd give a close up because she was in Milledgeville. If you look down at the bottom there, Sister Ramona heals prayer. Are you suffering? Are you sick? Do you need help? Bring your problems to Sister Ramona and be rid of them tomorrow. Right? O'Connor found it interesting and kept it. As far as artifacts, there's a few of them. Flannery's pot holder she made. Okay. Last but not least, materials related to Edward O'Connor. There's about a box and a half of materials that are devoted to Edward O'Connor. Last but not least. There are a couple of scrapbooks that Regina put together, and I think these are, I don't know enough to know if you could go through here and find things off the top of my head. I don't know that you're going to go here and find things that you couldn't find in print elsewhere, but it shows how Regina remembered him and what she put together in the scrapbooks. There are also some handwritten copies of speeches that he gave to the American Legion. And so I'm not sure if there are also printed copies of those that appeared in newspaper that are different than the handwritten versions. But you've got some of that material related to Edward O'Connor. There are letters from World War I that I think that originally were sent from Edward O'Connor to his mother, and then presumably his mother ultimately sent them to Regina. And so if you look on the left, you've got one sent, I think, from the front lines in France in April of 1918. And if you look on the right, this is written November the 12th of 1918, the day after, right, the armistice. Dear mother, the war is over and I am lost. So his sense of just the jarring shock of moving from warfare to peacetime. is one thing that he's commenting on. So a question that runs through all of our minds is, did Flannery ever read these letters? And I don't know, right? But the letters are there. There is also one short story written by Ed O'Connor, right? So Flannery, of course, knew um, his passion for writing, and we've got one short story by him. So that's the end of my slides. There's a lot here, and we've just done kind of a whirlwind tour. But what can the gift help us to do? I think to better understand O'Connor's education broadly conceived, right? The things that she read on her own, as well as I do think that all the materials, even the anthologies, the notes, and so on from her high school years and her time at Georgia College, I think there's a lot to see there. Her engagement with her contemporary milieu, the journals, the magazines. We do have, I think, even, in the condolence letters to Regina, we may have additional ways to understand O'Connor's friendships and networks of correspondence. Obviously, the bulk of the material that's in these boxes that I didn't really concentrate on in my slides will help us to understand Regina O'Connor and life in Andalusia, especially to understand Edward O'Connor. And there are materials I really haven't talked much about at all, but some materials that will help us to understand the extended family in Milledgeville and to a lesser extent in Savannah. So that is the end of my slide presentation, and I will leave it up for the moment in case somebody wants to go back and look at something in particular. But I am happy to answer questions. I will say, as we move into the questions, um, if I seem reticent about anything, it's probably just because I am overwhelmed by all of this material myself. It really is just an overwhelming amount of material. And I do have notes that are separate from all this. Um, but there we go. I'm happy to take some questions.
Thank you so much, Dr. O'Gorman. And we can take questions if you want to just raise your hand, we can call on you, or if you want to put something in the chat, we can try to get that to out that way. Does anyone have questions? Jessica raised a hand. Okay. Do you want to just go ahead and unmute and ask your question, Jessica?
Thank you. Thank you, Farrell, for that presentation. Super exciting. I'm kind of curious about this little detail, this letter and from Dean Hood. Have we seen Dean Hood before? Or are there other, is this the first time? And I don't know, I could be missing something, or there are Dean Hood letters in the habit of
Yeah.
being, or
Yeah, good question. I'm glad we have so many other people on this call who might be able to answer better than I do. I mean, she's um, mentioned in Gooch's biography. That's where I first turned, to kind of review, well, who is Dean Hood? But yeah, others may know the answer to that question better than I do.
because I'm kind of curious, right? I'm in Florida these days, and I just got to teach, an undergrad course in O'Connor last semester. And every time I go through O'Connor's, corpus, I'm struck by how many Florida references there are.
Hmm.
I'm curious, like how early the Dean Hood correspondence starts, and if some of the, you know, Florida references are coming from her. So I don't know. I'm just sort of wondering out loud, but yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and I don't think there's any correspondence with her in the habit of being. I don't think, but I think she's mentioned in the habit of being to other people. I think. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Thanks.
Um, Katie, should I call on people or I can't really see everybody.
Yeah, there's so much I can't see as long as we have the slideshow up. I really can't see the full
Okay.
picture. So, but I've
Yeah.
got some questions in the chat I can put to you. Let's see. Matt Bryant Cheney seems like Hazel will be fine. Oh no, this is
I think two people have their hands raised.
okay. Can
Yeah.
you
Yeah, I see
see?
Monica and Rosemary, and
Okay.
okay, yeah, I can see everybody better now. So maybe Monica first and then Rosemary?
Thank you. Boy, I'm sure you can imagine how excited I am by all of this. Um, I wonder, one of the things that I enjoyed about the archives at Emory was the presence of her father in them, because I just find Edward to be fascinating. So could you talk a little bit more about what is the story that he wrote like? That just sounds really cool.
Yeah. It's a kind of um detective story, I think. To be honest with you, I can't remember it well. That sounds awful, but it is sort of
Now, I would imagine all these materials. Oh my goodness, you must just be completely overwhelmed. These are being held at Andalusia.
these are currently, yeah, at the Andalusia Interpretive Center.
Okay.
That's where they currently are. Yeah.
And are they open for scholars to look at?
My yeah, yeah, my
Okay.
understanding is that you can make an appointment at the interpretive center to go and have and request something be brought out of the boxes to you. Um, I think over time Georgia College will, you know, maybe think about doing this in different ways, but that's where they currently are.
Well, and they've got such great archive space now.
Yeah.
Um,
Rosemary?
Rosemary, yeah.
Yeah, so I had a question and a comment. My question was the same as Monica's, like, how do we gain access to it? So thanks for your answer to that and for the presentation.
Mhm.
There is material related to Dean Hood um, in the Rose Library at Emory. And what I can tell you in it is in I'm looking at the finding aid right now, and it doesn't go into a lot of detail, but there is a box. It's in a box, box 5 of the O'Connor collection. So there's additional material available related to uh, Dean Hood there, which might be interesting to a number of scholars.
Great. Great. Something I'm thinking about, going back to Monica's question, curiously, with the Ed O'Connor material, there's his one story, and then there's like 12 stories by somebody else whose last name is Yeager, and who also lived on, I think, Charlton Street in Savannah. And I thought, is this like a pen name? Did he write these stories under another name? Um, Googling around a little, I found this person's name, Yeager, somewhere, indicating to me that he was a real person in Savannah who lived near the O'Connors, and later did actually publish some short fiction. So his friendship with this individual, and I think his interest in the writing market. I think there may be like a writer's market sort of magazine from the late 20s, right, in Edward O'Connor's material. So I think even though we've only got the one story by him, there are other materials there that might help might help us to better understand him as somebody who is interested in fiction writing himself.
Christine Flanagan has a hand raised.
Hi, everybody. Great to see you. Like Monica and Rosemary, this is tremendous, Farrell. It's really interesting stuff. And I wonder, Katie, I was thinking of you too. Um, as I see some of these things, like some of them I recognize and I have something to say about, and then other people like the Dean Hood, and I just feel like with the limited resources of archiving, it's so interesting to consider what could be done with crowdsourcing. We don't have digital archives of O'Connor, but I love when, for example, Andalusia posts old photographs and they provide the images. So I wonder even if you'd like to like post images of what's in the archives, and maybe we can kind of crowdsource if anybody recognizes the references. Carol's here, she would recognize the Marriott Lee material. It might be fun to try and crowdsource if there's anything that's an an interesting mystery to people as well.
I love that idea. Thank you. It's a great idea. Yeah, resources. So we have Holly Croft on the call, Special Collections. We have the Institute, Andalusia Institute. We have Andalusia Farm, and all these entities can receive donations, and we would gladly put them toward archiving this material for sure. But that's a great idea, to just a photo at a time, or a book, an annotation at a time.
Lisa Jenny.
Do we have any more questions, comments? And you can raise your hand. I see something in the chat. These are more comments.
I can ask a question really quickly.
Great.
There's so much to go through, and Farrell, we've talked about this collection a couple times. When you were going through it, what do you think? I mean, this sounds like a reflective question, but I'm actually really curious to hear this from you. What do you think you were most surprised to kind of learn in the pieces that you were able to work through? I mean, you know so much about O'Connor, and what kind of stood out as a surprising find for you in the pile?
Yeah, it's hard to come up with a single thing. It's a series of surprises. Nothing, nothing completely earth-shattering, I would say, but it gave me um it gave me a different sense of her than I could get from just reading the biographies and seeing things that I'd seen before. Just silly as it is, the pranks from Dean Hood and the rocks, and the sense of the friendship between the two of them that seemed to be connected to that. That's one thing that stood out. Uh, among the books, definitely To the Lighthouse, right? That was picking that up and seeing all the annotations in there was really just a pleasure, and to be holding that for the first time. Now going along, there are some mild disappointments. I picked up her copy of Moby Dick, and I realized she actually had two copies of Moby Dick, because there's one that's mentioned in Kinney. There's one that's right, I guess, at Georgia College, but there was another copy of Moby Dick in there. And I had this theory about, one part of Ahab's speech in the quarterdeck chapter that she maybe echoes in A Good Man Is Hard to Find. And I wanted to find evidence. I wanted to find an annotation there, and it wasn't there. But yeah, all of that. But there were little pleasures, like the Book of Limericks was a lot of fun, and just the little annotations, like the poor girl about Yates's daughter, just her sense of humor coming through, and all the stuff about her father in particular is really just we know so little about him, and so just to see those letters, and they're not only the letters from the front, but also I think some letters from when he was in college. He went to Mount St. Mary's College in Maryland, right? So there's some more material there. And again, thinking about the way that Regina remembered him, as well as, remembering O'Connor, the sense of family relationships, I guess, right, was really sort of solidified, or given some more ballast, right, by the materials that are in this gift.
So we have two more hands. I think Charlotte was first, then Carol, or it might be the other way.
Yeah, I just wanted, so first of all, thank you so much. This was a really fun and exciting presentation. So I'm kind of doing ongoing research on Betty Hester Always, and I was wondering if you can give a sense of what was in that letter, if you
Yeah.
open it.
Yeah, it's mildly disappointing, to be honest with you. If you look at their last letter that's in the habit of being, I think Flannery they're talking about a review that Walker Percy did of a novel, a fairly obscure novel. It's about Richard Hughes, somebody like that, but they're discussing a book review. And most of Betty Hester's letter is just a rant against Walker Percy's book review. And she didn't really like the moviegoer either, right? So So that's what it is. Although she does say a couple of things about, I think, Revelation, right? So she is commenting on a couple of O'Connor's most recent stories, but most of it is this rant against Walker Percy.
Thank you. That makes me laugh.
Yeah, yeah,
Interesting in and of itself. Yeah. Well,
yeah.
Carol, did you have a question?
Yes, I really enjoyed this presentation. And you might have answered this question at the beginning, but where were all these boxes stored until they were made available?
Well, they were in a storage unit, a climate controlled storage unit on the road between Georgia College and Andalusia. And where they were before that, I'm not sure. I mean, this is just kind of speculation, but my general sense is that these are materials that initially, for the most part, Regina just didn't think were that important, and were some of it was Flannery's things that were mixed with her things. She probably didn't think that like the childhood books or even her high school or college books would ever be of interest to people. That would be my guess. Then some of the books that are more books like To the Lighthouse or the Henry James, the Dostoevsky, right, which I found in these boxes. My guess is maybe those were on the bookshelves, right, at Andalusia, and she didn't want to take them off the bookshelves. So if you look at Kenny's if you look at Kenny's preface, right, he says that some of those books, he says he's wondering where the Robert Penn Warren is, and where I think the Glasgow is. Um, and he says that Sally Fitzgerald says in 1985, some of those books are being privately held at Andalusia. And my guess is, right, they were just on the bookshelves then, and it all got kind of put in boxes and stored away, and people forgot about them.
I asked that question just because I remember when some of the paintings were revealed, they were also stored in like a storage unit behind
Yeah,
like a fast food restaurant in Milledgeville, and it
they
strikes
were.
me that some of this archival material is it's just kind of like by chance that we find it. I know this from the archival material of Marriott Lee. It was stored in a barn for a few years before someone drove down from West Virginia to get it, and they're still getting donations that they're finding. Um, and it just seems sometimes like serendipitous what's kept. Of course, Flannery O'Connor was more well known, and I think there was a much greater sense of her legacy. But
I'd just like to add to that the materials that are at Emory, the O'Connor materials that are at Emory, are by and large from that same warehouse, that same storage unit where these other materials were found. So that was an intentional place for materials to be, that particular storage unit.
I had a question, Farrell. You talked a lot about the Virginia Woolf that was heavily annotated. And I know you talked about that in London, but I didn't get to see the talk, so maybe you mentioned more. But was that surprising to you, that she was such a reader and looking at Virginia Woolf for
Mhm.
style and craft?
Mhm.
Or
Well, I think so. I mean, I think that the comments she makes about Wolf in the habit of being or mildly disparaging,
Mhm.
right? And so I hadn't really thought about it deeply. But when I was going through the boxes, I was not expecting to find To the Lighthouse. And then I saw it and I said, oh, well, there are a lot of books in here that I'm not entirely surprised to see on her bookshelf, but I wasn't expecting that one. I wasn't surprised that it was in the box, but to pick it up and see all the annotations,
Yeah.
she had never expressed any great admiration for Wolfe in letters. So that's what surprised me.
Yeah. But she sounds like she was really studying her style,
Yeah,
and
yeah. Although again, I think if you go through the book, I do also think she's taken with the character of Mrs. Ramsey as a mother and thinking about maternity. Um, in the book. I do think there's some engagement with the substance if you look at the all the annotations.
all right. Do we have any more questions? I don't see any in the chat. Anyone else want to comment, ask a question? Well, thank you very much. We really appreciate you sharing all this with us, and we'll look forward to scholarly inquiry and what might come of this beautiful gift. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you for organizing, and thanks to everyone for being here. It's great to see so many participants.
Yeah. Thanks for
Thank
coming.
you. So much fun.
Yeah.
Thank you, Farrell.
Thank you.
Thank you.